Harry Potter, Reborn as Regulus Black. Chapter 21, None of them are good people. Lily gathered her stack of books again, then hesitated and set them back down. Actually, I'm looking for sources for a potions essay, she said. Professor Slughorn assigned a review on how Moonstone works in calming drafts. He wants at least 3 primary references. She stared at the pile with a troubled expression. But I don't know how to organize it. All these books say roughly the same thing, but not quite. Regulus glanced at her. He knew young witches and wizards had never been taught how to write this kind of paper. How do you usually write essays? He asked. Well. Lily hesitated. I copy what the books say and add my own understanding. Regulus pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit with him. There's a structured way of writing papers used in Muggle universities, he said. The moment she heard Muggle universities, Lily's eyes lit up. First, Regulus continued, don't start writing right away. Read through all your materials. Note down every useful point and mark the source. Lily blinked, listening intently. Regulus tore a blank sheet of parchment from his notebook and ripped it into small strips. For example, he said, writing as he spoke, Moonstone's lunar magic can neutralize residual agitation from nightmare grass. Moonlight and Potions, page 147. In the corner, he wrote source 1. Now you have one discrete piece of information. Once you've gathered enough, you sort them. Properties. Preparation methods. Side effects. Lily's eyes widened. And then? Then you look for the relationships between them. Regulus tapped his wand lightly, and the parchment slips floated into the air. Say Book A says Moonstone should be ground into powder. Book B insists it must be sliced. Book C uses it whole, steeped intact. At that point, you ask why. Different recipes. Different schools of thought. Or maybe the authors studied Moonstone from different regions. The slips rearranged themselves in midair. When you find the reason for the differences, your essay gains depth. Finally, you connect everything with your own logic. Considering factor X, author A's view applies better in situation Y, while author B's method is superior under condition Z. Therefore, a combined recommendation would be. Lily was completely absorbed. She pulled out her own parchment and quill, scribbling the steps down as fast as she could. Skim, source, categorize, find connections, build logic. She looked up, thrilled. This is amazing. Can I tell other people? My friends are struggling with their essays too. Regulus nodded. You can. Just don't say I taught you. She stopped writing and looked at him, confused. Why not? Because I'm a Slytherin, and you're a Gryffindor, Regulus said calmly. Some boundaries don't need to be crossed deliberately. And there's no need to provoke anything. If your friends ask, say you saw it in a Muggle library. A Slytherin sharing Muggle methods was taboo among pure-blood circles, especially in the current climate. But he believed Lily would keep the secret. She understood the importance of boundaries. It was also a test. Whether she could keep a promise mattered. After a moment of thought, Lily understood his meaning. As a pure-blood Slytherin, he shouldn't be the one to discover, promote, or spread Muggle approaches, even if they worked. She nodded firmly. I understand. Thank you, Black. You're welcome. Lily packed up her things and headed off. At the end of the shelves, she turned back. You know, she said, if you were in Gryffindor, we might have become very good friends. Regulus looked up at her earnest expression. His voice was quiet. Friends aren't divided by houses, Miss Evans. Lily smiled, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. Then, goodbye, Regulus. Goodbye, Lily. The red-haired girl disappeared between the shelves. Regulus stayed seated, knowing someone else would come. 5 minutes later, a cold voice emerged from the shadows. "Stay away from her." Severus Snape stepped out from between two shelves, his black robes nearly blending into the darkness. He looked paler than usual, lips pressed into a thin line. Something restrained and furious churned in his dark eyes. Regulus stopped what he was doing and met his gaze calmly. "Snape. Can I help you?" "I said, stay away from Lily," Snape hissed, his voice low and sharp, like a snake tasting the air. "Your tricks are obvious. Pretending to be gentle. Pretending to be different. All to gain her trust, and then... And then what?" Regulus cut in. "Use her? Hurt her?" Snape took a step forward, fingers tightening at his sleeve. "You think you're better than the rest of them? You think I don't see what you're doing?" Regulus let out a quiet breath. "Snape, you were watching the whole time, weren't you? Watching Lily talk to me. Watching her smile. Watching her leave. And then you came out to warn me." He looked straight at him. "Do you think that's protecting her? Or is it that you can't stand seeing her show kindness to anyone but you?" Snape's face twisted. "You. Let me finish." Regulus lifted a hand, small and controlled. "You're angry not because I might hurt Lily. You know I won't. At least not now. You're angry because Lily chose to talk to me. Because she smiled at me. Because she looked like she was willing to trust a Slytherin who wasn't you." He leaned back slightly. "You want to be the only wizard she trusts. The special one. The one who understands her completely." Snape's breathing grew ragged. His fingers trembled. The truth had landed. Regulus shook his head, his tone cooling. "Today she talks to me. Tomorrow she might brew potions with James Potter." At the name, Snape's pupils shrank. His fingers almost curled around his wand. "See?" Regulus said quietly. "I only said his name, and you lost control. I'll give you some advice, Snape. If you truly care about Lily, don't try to control who she talks to or befriends. All that does is push her farther away. Let her choose to stay by your side. Don't force it by driving everyone else off." Snape stood rigid, his body taut beneath the robes. After several seconds, he finally spoke. "What would you know, a pure-blood heir like you could never understand." "I understand more than you think," Regulus interrupted, meeting his eyes. "I understand pure-blood arrogance. I understand the struggle of half-bloods. I understand the isolation of Muggle-borns. None of that excuses what you're doing." He stood and walked past Snape without another glance. "Warning me," he said lightly. He retrieved astrological meditation and headed toward Madame Pance's desk, leaving Snape alone in the shadows. As he walked, Regulus reflected that Snape was a contradiction. Brilliant talent, trapped by inferiority and possessiveness. Craving power. Drawn to darkness. In the original story, he only woke up after losing Lily. When it was already too late. Today's words might not sink in. If Snape was smart enough, he would start to reflect. If not, then at least he now knew Regulus wasn't his enemy. The irony was that Snape's fixation on Lily was his greatest weakness. Voldemort would exploit it. Dumbledore would too. Perhaps when everyone else tried to use that obsession, the one person who didn't would gain something unexpected. And speaking of Snape inevitably led to James Potter. In Regulus's view, Lily's so-called destined match was little more than a disposable character. A schoolyard bully who happened to repent later, join the right side, and was then celebrated as a hero. Rewarded with love. With friendship. With family. With posthumous honor. The world could be deeply ironic. Good and evil, hero and villain, were often judged not by what you'd done, but by where you stood at the end. Snape wasn't a good man. Potter was no better. From some angles, Potter was worse. Regulus let the thought go. Since this world embraced redemption arcs, there was no need to dwell on it. Madame Pants examined the book. Astrological meditation. Obscure. 2-week loan period. That's enough, Regulus said, signing his name. When he left the library, torches were already lit along the castle corridors, their flickering light stretching long shadows across the stone walls. Chapter 22, Astrological Meditation. By mid-September, the morning fog in the Scottish Highlands had yet to fully lift. The History of Magic classroom on the third floor of the castle was already packed with bleary-eyed first years. When Professor Binns drifted into the room, almost no one looked up. Hogwarts' oldest professor began the day's lecture in his usual dry, unchanging monotone. Today, we will continue our discussion of the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. The uprising began at the Three Broomsticks in Hogsmeade Village, when the Goblin leader, Regulus, found himself watching the professor instead of listening. Professor Binns was translucent. When sunlight passed through him, it left only the faintest shadow on the stone floor beneath the lectern. What caught Regulus's attention wasn't the sight, but the magic. Other professors' magic felt like living things. Flowing flames. A deep, still lake. Something vigorous and warm. Professor Binns's magic was almost non-existent. Or more precisely, nearly impossible to perceive. Regulus closed his eyes and focused his magical senses toward the lectern. A normal wizard's magic was like ripples on water, with a clear center and edge. Professor Binns's magic felt more like a thin fog. Even, diffuse and stable. No rise or fall. No core. It blended so seamlessly with the surroundings that it was hard to tell where it ended. As a child, Regulus had read that the soul was the source of magic. A ghost had to be sustained by something. So what did a ghost's magic look like? A concept from his past life surfaced. The conversion between matter and energy. When a wizard died, the body vanished and the soul remained. What happened to magic? Did it shift from being anchored to the body to being anchored to the soul? Professor Binns continued droning on about goblins using counterfeit galleons to destabilize Gringotts. Regulus looked out the window. The fog was thinning, revealing a sliver of dark green forest in the distance. His thoughts wandered farther. If ghosts were remnants of the soul, then what was the difference, magically speaking, between a complete soul and a fragment? Was Voldemort's pursuit of immortality an attempt to bypass the process of bodily death followed by soul remnants? By splitting the soul? He didn't have enough knowledge to draw a conclusion. When the bell rang, Professor Binns had just reached the part where the rebellion was ultimately suppressed by the Ministry of Magic. He didn't say a word about dismissal. He simply drifted straight through the wall, leaving behind a roomful of students who were still half asleep. At 2 in the afternoon, sunlight poured across the eastern side of the library. Madame Pants patrolled the shelves in silence, sharp-eyed and vigilant. Regulus planned to linger near the outer edge of the restricted section. By Hogwarts rules, first years weren't allowed to borrow books from the restricted section, or even enter it. But not being allowed to borrow didn't mean not being allowed to look. The shelves weren't fully sealed. From a distance, you could still make out some of the titles on the spines. Madame Pants made a full circuit of the library every 30 minutes, and she always paused longer near the restricted section. Regulus timed it carefully. He walked toward the area at an even pace, holding a copy of Changes in Medieval Magical Law as if he were just passing through. His gaze swept the shelves and only stopped near the deepest end. There sat a thick, leather-bound volume with frayed edges. The lettering on the spine was worn but still legible. A Brief History of Soul Magic. The author's name had been rubbed away. Regulus tried to turn the page with magic alone. No spells. Just raw control. He compressed his magic into a thread-thin strand and pushed it toward the restricted section. It failed. The instant his magic crossed the boundary, it was violently dispersed by a vast, heavy force. He was about to try again when a cold voice sounded behind him. "Mr. Black." Regulus snapped all his magic back at once and turned to face the librarian. "Madam Pants." "You stood in front of the restricted section for a full minute," Madam Pants said, her gaze sharp as a blade. "First-year students are forbidden from interacting with it. I trust you know the rules." "Yes, ma'am." Regulus lifted the book in his hand. "I was looking for reference material. I passed by and couldn't help being impressed by the size of the collection. Hogwarts library is remarkable." His tone was sincere. His expression held nothing but genuine hunger for knowledge. Madame Pance's expression softened by a fraction, though her eyes remained wary. "The books in the restricted section are sealed for a reason. Much of that knowledge is not suitable for young witches and wizards. Return to your seat." "Of course, ma'am." Regulus inclined his head slightly and turned toward the potions shelves. "I need that book," he thought. As the library slowly grew more crowded, Regulus packed up his things and headed back to the Slytherin common room to finish his potions essay. At 11 that night, the Slytherin dormitory was silent. Cuthbert Avery was already asleep, his breathing steady and even. A faint glow still shone from behind Alex's curtains. He was probably previewing tomorrow's charms lesson. Hermes's curtains were drawn tight. No sound came from within, but Regulus knew he wasn't asleep yet. Regulus pulled his own dark green curtains closed and cast a soundproofing charm. Then he sat cross-legged on his bed and closed his eyes. Astrological meditation lay open on his knees, turned to the third chapter. Resonating with Orion. According to the book, Orion was the king of the winter sky. The 3 stars of his belt embodied balance and strength. The meditator was meant to locate Orion in the night sky, touch the 3 stars with magic, feel the pulse of their starlight, and eventually synchronize their own magic circulation with the rhythm of the constellation. Typical wizard mysticism, Regulus thought. He'd tried it 3 times. Every attempt had failed. The method wasn't wrong. He'd followed the steps exactly. Sense the night sky. Locate the constellation. Extend magical tendrils. And got nothing. He couldn't feel any so-called starlight pulse at all. Constellations were just visual projections of distant stars. There was no real connection between them. Where would a pulse come from? And yet, the method clearly worked for the author. Maybe the author had some special talent. An ability to perceive things others couldn't. Regulus didn't have that. So he would replace it with what he did have. An adult's way of thinking. A foundation in basic astrophysics. Sensitivity to geometry and mathematics. Microscopic level control over magic. Computational ability that bordered on absurd. And his magical perception. He needed a new approach. First, abandon sensing the real night sky. If anything, Regulus suspected the author had written the book just to show off. "I have what you don't." You couldn't see the sky from the Slytherin dormitory, but that didn't matter. He used magic to construct a constellation model in his mind. Magic flowed deep within his consciousness, sketching the first point. Betelgeuse, the red giant marking Orion's right shoulder. Then Rigel. Bellatrix. One point after another, lighting up the darkness of his inner vision. Using memorized star chart data, he built a 3-dimensional model, scaled by real relative positions and brightness. It was exhausting. Maintaining the precise placement of 12 points at once steadily drained both magic and focus. But Regulus held on. Next came the connections. Magic condensed into fine threads. From Betelgeuse to Bellatrix, forming the right arm. From Rigel to Scythe, forming the left. The 3 belt stars linked by parallel lines. A glowing Orion took shape in his mind. Clean proportions. Smooth lines. Then came synchronization. This was the core. The book's method relied on following the constellation's pulse. Regulus had no pulse to follow, but he had a model. He imagined his own magic circulation as a luminous river. Then he embedded the Orion model into that river, letting the constellation's geometry become part of the riverbed. As magic flowed past Betelgeuse, its speed adjusted slightly. At Orion's belt, it split into 3 thin streams, moving in parallel. Across the whole structure, it traced the constellation's outer contours. At first, it was stiff. The magic resisted the imposed structure, and the model wavered. The points flickered. Regulus slowed the flow, smoothing the circulation. At the same time, he refined the model. The belt stars shouldn't form a perfect straight line. A subtle curve was needed. Betelgeuse was 1.3 times brighter than Rigel. That point should exert stronger pull. Perhaps the flow should intensify proportionally as magic passed through it. He kept adjusting. Gradually, the resistance eased. The magic began to adapt to the structure, aided by the countless hours he'd already spent training magic circulation. Like water finding a new channel. Artificial, but smooth enough. 1 cycle. 2. 3. Regulus opened his eyes and let out a quiet breath. He examined himself. The speed of his magic circulation hadn't increased, but it was steadier. The ripples felt smoothed down. With a thought, an invisible, heavy barrier snapped into place around his body. He held it for a full minute, then let it dissolve. A moment later, he reached a conclusion. Magic consumption was unchanged. Recovery speed had improved. The change was slight, but undeniably real. It worked. Chapter 23, Herbology. On the third Thursday of late September, morning dew clung to the greenhouse glass in fine beads. First-year herbology was held in Greenhouse 3, home to relatively safe magical plants. Safe, at least, when handled correctly. Today, we'll be learning how to process bubotubers, Professor Sprout said, standing before a row of clay pots. She wore thick dragon-hide gloves. Her round face was flushed in the humid warmth of the greenhouse. Who can tell me what bubotuber pus is used for? A Hufflepuff boy shot his hand into the air. It treats severe acne, Professor, but it has to be heavily diluted. Otherwise it causes even worse boils. Exactly right. 5 points to Hufflepuff, Professor Sprout said with a nod. Now, pair up. Each of you will receive 1 bubotuber, a pair of gloves, and a glass bottle. Your task is to extract the pus safely and collect it in the bottle. Be careful not to splash it on your skin or robes. Regulus was paired with Cuthbert. Cuthbert wrinkled his nose as he accepted the pot. That thing is ugly. He wasn't wrong. The bubotuber was a dark brown, bulbous mass, its surface covered in knobby swellings. Each bump ended in a tiny pore, slowly oozing a thick yellow-green fluid. Put your gloves on, Regulus said, already sliding his dragon-hide gloves into place. He lifted his tuber and focused his magical senses. All matter carried magic. That much he knew. Porcupine quills concentrated magic at their tips. But bubotubers. His perception sank inward. The first thing he sensed was life. All plants possessed a slow, steady life flow, like a muted heartbeat. But woven into the bubotuber's life magic was something else. A sharp feedback pricked his awareness. The plant's overall magic was stable, but around the swollen nodes, the magic churned in disorder. The pus itself radiated even stronger turbulence, mixed with something unfamiliar. An emotion. Regulus studied the plant more closely. Pain. The word surfaced unbidden. Not pain in the complex, layered sense humans experienced. More like a raw, instinctive distress. The kind of emergency response a living organism produced when injured, etched directly into its magical signature. What are you staring at? Cuthbert had already filled half his bottle. The yellow-green liquid slid sluggishly along the glass. Hurry up. This stuff smells foul. Regulus nodded. He pinched one of the larger swellings between thumb and forefinger and applied gentle pressure. Pop. Thick pus spilled out and dripped into the bottle. In that instant, Regulus caught the shift. The chaotic magic around the swelling eased, while a sharp spike of discomfort rippled through the plant as a whole, then gradually settled. Like lancing a boil. A brief surge of pain, followed by relief. He squeezed 3 more nodes, observing the same pattern each time. On the 4th, he looked up at Professor Sprout as she made her rounds. Professor. She approached at once. Yes, Mr. Black. The bubituber, Regulus said, hesitating slightly. When it secretes pus, does it experience some form of distress? I mean, from a magical perspective, the secretion seems to be accompanied by a pain response. Regulus had a habit of asking strange questions. Questions that, to most young witches and wizards, sounded like nonsense. Every word familiar, yet incomprehensible when put together. But the students had begun to notice a pattern. Those baffling questions often struck directly at something the professors cared about, earning Regulus praise and extra house points. It had become a familiar sight in Slytherin classes. By now, Regulus's reputation preceded him. Nearby students turned to look at him almost in unison, hands pausing mid-squeeze. Cuthbert's expression was the most complicated of all. He frowned at his inscrutable roommate, that familiar mix of confusion and quiet frustration rising again. He couldn't understand what went on inside the second son of the Black family's head. Where did these thoughts come from? Some obscure book? Or did Regulus simply reason them out on his own? What unsettled Cuthbert most was that Regulus never asked at random. Every question landed with purpose. Compared to him, everyone else suddenly felt like idiots reciting instructions without ever thinking deeper. The Hufflepuff sitting a short distance away, however, looked less alienated and more openly curious. They exchanged glances. Discomfort. Pain. Plants could feel things. Professor Sprout's eyes widened. She took a few quick steps toward Regulus, her voice bright with surprise. You noticed that? Yes, Professor. Regulus inclined his head politely. The magic in the pus is highly unstable, and when pressure is applied, the plant's overall magic fluctuates briefly. It's similar to the magical response animals show when injured. Professor Sprout studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Very few students recognize this at first-year level. Most see bubitubers as nothing more than ingredient sources. She straightened and addressed the class. Mr. Black has raised an important point. Many magical plants possess simple emotions. Bubituber pus is, at its core, a defensive mechanism. The secretion process places a burden on the plant itself. That's why, when harvesting, we should be as gentle as possible and minimize their discomfort. She demonstrated, pressing slowly with the pads of her fingers rather than squeezing roughly. A considerate harvester produces purer ingredients, Professor Sprout said. This is one of herbology's first lessons, and one many forget. 10 points to Slytherin, for careful observation. Cuthbert leaned closer and muttered, How could you even tell? I just thought it was disgusting. Focus, reading, and a bit of talent, Regulus replied simply, continuing with the remaining nodes. At the same time, his thoughts turned inward. Plants had emotions, however primitive. What did that imply? If emotions could imprint themselves onto magic, could magic carry more complex emotional states? Could it be used to harm, or to heal? As the lesson entered its latter half, students began cleaning their tools. Regulus rinsed the glass bottle, removed his gloves, and walked over to where Professor Sprout was rearranging the plant racks. Professor, I have another question. Go on, my dear. It's about mandrakes, Regulus said. I've read that an adult mandrake's cry is fatal to humans. I'm wondering whether that lethality acts on the body, or the mind. Professor Sprout paused and turned to face him, her expression growing serious. That's an advanced topic. We usually cover mandrakes in detail in later years. I know, Professor, but I'm curious, Regulus said, polite but firm. If simply blocking your ears prevents death, then the danger lies in hearing the sound. Does the sound itself carry magic? Or does it trigger some reaction within the listener? Professor Sprout didn't answer immediately. She gestured for Regulus to follow her to a quiet corner of the greenhouse, where a few wicker chairs sat. Once they were seated, she spoke. To answer your first question, it's both. A mandrake's cry contains a powerful form of mental impact magic. It directly interferes with the listener's soul stability, causing a collapse of consciousness. That is the mental cause of death. At the same time, such a collapse triggers physical chain reactions. Cardiac arrest. Respiratory failure. Magical destabilization. In the end, death results from both mental and physical breakdown. Regulus nodded, absorbing the explanation quickly. Then how do protective earmuffs work? Do they block the sound entirely, or weaken the magical transmission? An excellent question. The approval in Professor Sprout's eyes deepened. Standard earmuffs use a sound filtering charm. It removes the specific magical component, the lethal factor in the mandrake's cry. So strictly speaking, you can still hear it. What you hear is a purified, harmless version. Regulus's thoughts raced. Which means the mandrake's lethality lies in the magic carried by the sound. Then, is it possible to reverse it? Professor Sprout's expression sharpened. What are you thinking, child? Treatment, Regulus said, not entirely falsely. If a type of magic can destroy, could it be adjusted to repair? For example, could a similar but inverted magic be used to heal mental trauma? Chapter 24, Natural Magic and Mandrakes. This is an extremely dangerous field, Professor Sprout said slowly. Sound-based magic, especially when it involves the mind, sits at the boundary between advanced dark magic and advanced healing magic. Historically, there have been witches and wizards who researched therapeutic sound. Most of those experiments ended in tragedy. Because it's hard to control. Because sound is intangible and diffuse, Professor Sprout explained. You can precisely guide a spell's trajectory. Sound spreads on its own. And every soul has subtle differences. A treatment that works for you might be lethal to me. There is no universal solution. No universal solution, Regulus noted silently. But sound could be focused. Physics had proven that much. There was no reason magic couldn't do the same. If there was no universal solution, then what about individual calibration? If a soul could be detected, measured, adjusted to? And more importantly, if treatment had to be personalized, then what about lethality? That could be scaled. Aloud, Regulus asked, one more question, Professor. If a mandrake's cry is that dangerous, why isn't the mandrake itself affected? And how do mandrakes interact with each other? Professor Sprout smiled. You're brushing up against N.E.W.T level research now. The short answer is that mandrakes have their own form of immunity. Their auditory perception isn't the same as a wizard's. As for communication, we don't actually know if they need it. No one has successfully translated mandrake language yet. At least, no one who lived to publish the results. She stood and brushed soil from her robes. Keep your curiosity, Mr. Black. Just remember, until you have sufficient knowledge and protection, don't experiment lightly. I understand, Professor. Thank you, Regulus said sincerely. He stood as well, several lines of thought already branching in his mind. Wide area lethality. Precision lethality. Mental damage. Physical damage. And if time allowed, mental healing was worth pursuing too. The bell rang. Students began filing out of the greenhouse. Regulus deliberately packed his things more slowly, waiting until the others were gone. "Mr. Black," Professor Sprout called, as expected. "Could you stay a moment longer?" "Of course, Professor." They walked out of the greenhouse and onto the gravel path outside the castle. September wind carried a lingering warmth, and ripples spread across the surface of the Black Lake in the distance. "Your magical perception is unusual," Professor Sprout said without preamble. "Most witches and wizards sense magic the way they see color. They know it's there. They can tell strength apart. But they struggle to describe detail. For me, it's like an extra sense," Regulus answered carefully. "I can perceive the emotions in a bubatuber. Or more precisely, I feel them." He chose partial honesty. Professor Sprout was the head of Hufflepuff, known for her fairness and deep understanding of plant magic. She was worth a measure of trust. And his ability, while strong, wasn't unique in principle. Professor Sprout looked back toward the greenhouses. "In the deepest section of Greenhouse 2, there's a whomping willow sapling. I planted it 30 years ago, during a difficult period of my life. That tree is still more aggressive than others of its kind. More volatile. I've always suspected my emotions affected it." She sighed, then looked at Regulus seriously. "So here's my advice. Stay sensitive, but don't delve too deeply into dark plants. Some plants, like Devil's Snare or Venomous Tentacula, especially those bred through dark magic, accumulate pain, rage, and despair. That emotional residue can rebound onto the person sensing them." Her gaze sharpened. "Your talent is a gift. It can also be a curse. If you ever encounter something too dark while sensing magic, cut the connection immediately. Come to me, or another professor. Don't carry it alone." "I'll remember that, Professor," Regulus said, meeting her eyes and nodding steadily. He could tell her warning came from experience. She had seen cases like that before. Possibly tragedies. "And one more thing," Professor Sprout added, her tone softening. "If you're interested in plant magic research, you may apply to assist me after your owls. For now, focus on your fundamentals. Everything in the textbooks matters." "I will." "Off you go. Don't be late to your next class." That evening, with an hour free before dinner, Regulus took a detour to a small garden on the west side of the castle. It held ordinary ornamental plants. Nothing magical. Few people ever came here. He needed to test an idea. Daisies were commonly used as base ingredients in simple potions. He found two growing side by side. One was healthy and full. The other had 3 outer leaves with yellowed, withered edges. Pest damage, perhaps. Or poor nutrients. He crouched, placing his right hand on the soil near the healthy daisy's roots, his left near the damaged one. He closed his eyes and expanded his magical perception. The healthy daisy's magic was warm and steady, a soft pale gold, like a slowly turning halo. The damaged daisy's magic was far dimmer. Its light flickered, and in the withered leaves, the magic had nearly stalled. Regulus intended to guide the healthy plant's life magic to repair the damaged one. This wasn't a healing spell. Healing spells forced the caster's magic into the target. What he wanted was to act as a conduit, letting magic flow naturally between plants. He extended his own magic into 2 fine threads. One linked to the healthy daisy's core. The other to the damaged area. The threads were extremely thin, careful not to interfere with either plant's magic circulation. At the healthy end, he gently drew magic, creating a high-pressure region. At the damaged end, he lowered the pressure. Like water flowing downhill, the magic should move on its own. Nothing happened. The two plants' magic remained separate, ignoring the pressure gradient entirely. Regulus adjusted his approach. He remembered the emotional imprint of the bubatuber. Perhaps raw magical pressure wasn't enough. Perhaps plants responded better to instinctive patterns. He altered his output, mimicking the healthy daisy's natural fluctuations. 5 minutes passed. Then something changed. A faint golden thread of light emerged from the healthy daisy's core and began moving along Regulus's magical conduit. Slowly. The thread reached the damaged area and seeped into the yellowed leaves. Regulus held his breath and watched. Inside the leaf, magic stirred. Dormant nodes reactivated, beginning a slow, tentative circulation. It worked. But the efficiency was abysmal. After 10 minutes, he'd restored only about a tenth of a single leaf, while his own magic reserves had taken a noticeable hit. He pushed on for 5 more minutes. Then carefully severed the connection and withdrew his magic. On the damaged daisy, the outermost leaf showed a narrow ring of restored green, about the width of a fingernail. That was all. Regulus stood and rubbed his brow. The cost was far too high for the result. But the direction was correct. One key hypothesis had been confirmed. Plant magic could be transferred between individuals. More than that, natural magic, even the magic within seemingly passive life like plants, could be guided, borrowed, and even directed by a wizard's will. Mandrakes. If the gentle life magic of a daisy could be guided, then what about a magical plant that carried lethal power? Did mandrakes follow the same underlying principle? His thoughts accelerated, a structured idea taking shape. Reverse analysis of mandrake lethality based on guided plant magic. A mandrake's cry is fatal because it carries destructive magic targeting both soul and body. That magic, carried by sound, is fundamentally the same category as the daisy's life magic or the chaotic magic in Bubatuber pus. It is magic generated, held, or released by a plant. The difference lies in its extreme nature. If daisy magic can be guided and transferred, then mandrake magic should, in theory, also be guidable. The obstacle is qualitative. One nourishes. One annihilates. Mandrakes release their lethal magic through sound, a method inherent to their life form. To bypass the cry and access or guide the source directly may require understanding how mandrake magic circulates internally. Where it gathers. How it moves. Perhaps the correct starting point was mandrake seedlings. Observing how their magic evolved as they grew. That was where the answer likely waited. Chapter 25, Bones, and a Small Secret Between Roommates. By the time Regulus left the small garden, the sky had already darkened. Lights flickered on one by one in the castle windows. Dinner was close. He quickened his pace, only to run into someone at the entrance to the greenhouse area. A Hufflepuff girl. Second year, maybe third? Light brown hair twisted into a loose bun. She was crouched in front of a row of pots, carefully loosening the soil around a white dittany whose leaves were starting to droop. "You'll damage the lateral roots if you do it like that," Regulus said without thinking, stopping short. The girl looked up and blinked. "What?" "The angle of your trowel," Regulus said, pointing at the small metal spade in her hand. White dittany roots spread outward. They don't grow straight down. Digging vertically cuts the side roots. She glanced back down, then her eyes lit up. "That explains why it's been struggling, thank you." She adjusted her grip, sliding the trowel in at an angle and gently loosening the surrounding soil. "You're a first-year Slytherin, right?" she asked as she worked. It's rare to see Slytherins who know herbology this well. Regulus Black. "First year," he said. "I'm Eleanor Bones." "Third year." She smiled, one canine tooth peeking out. "The Bones family. You've probably heard of us." Then, with open curiosity rather than caution, she added, "I know who you are too." Hogwarts second Black. Before you arrived, a lot of people were guessing whether you'd follow 500 years of Black family tradition and go to Slytherin, or end up in Gryffindor like your brother. Regulus lifted a brow, mildly surprised. He knew his sorting had been watched closely. By students, by pure-blood families, even by some professors. Sirius's choice hadn't just been personal rebellion. It had shattered a 5-century pattern. 500 years was long enough for Black equals Slytherin to become an unspoken rule in the wizarding world. And in a time when old families were quietly reassessing their positions, the sorting of a Black heir could easily be read as a signal. Regulus had known all that from the start. He also knew the speculation wouldn't stop. In the original timeline, it wouldn't stop until the Black family was nearly gone. Still, this was the first time someone had brought it up to his face so directly. Eleanor Bones was more straightforward than any other pureblood he'd met so far. And of course, he knew the Bones family. One of the Sacred 28. Moderately aligned, with many members working at the Ministry of Magic. Eleanor was likely related to Amelia Bones, the future head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Regulus didn't dodge the topic. His gray eyes met hers calmly. Looks like the answer's Slytherin. People can stop guessing now. Eleanor blinked, then laughed. Fair enough. And it seems you're doing just fine there. Regulus didn't pursue the subject. Instead, he gestured at the pot. White Titani likes loose soil, but it hates being disturbed too often. You should add a layer of broken clay shards at the bottom for drainage. The soil in this pot holds too much water. The roots will rot. She stared at him. How can you tell the soil's holding too much water? The leaf edges are curling slightly and the color's gone too dark. That's poor root respiration. And when you loosened the soil earlier, it clumped together. That means excess moisture. Merlin, you're right. Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I've been using the standard soil mix, but maybe this batch of leaf mold was bad. Thank you for the advice, Mr. Black. Regulus gave a small nod. Under the fading light, they spent a few minutes trading tips. Eleanor showed him how to judge soil density by touch, and talked about cultivating a few uncommon magical plants. In return, Regulus shared several simple soil testing charms from household garden magic. Practical little tricks. Once she packed up her tools, Eleanor glanced toward the castle. We should head to the Great Hall. Walk together. Sure. They headed back side by side. A few Hufflepuffs passed them on the path, surprise flickering across their faces at the sight of Eleanor chatting with a Slytherin, but no one said anything. At the hall entrance, Eleanor waved. Good night, Mr. Black. Good night, Miss Bones. Regulus went to the Slytherin table. As he sat down, Cuthbert leaned over. What were you talking about with someone from the Bones family? Herbology, Regulus said, reaching for the roast meat. The earlier experiment had drained him more than expected. The Bones family's not bad, Cuthbert said. But that Amelia Bones at the ministry is too rigid. My father can't stand her. Maybe she can't stand Mr. Avery either, Regulus said. Cuthbert thought it over, then shrugged. You've got a point. Dash. Just past midnight, Regulus snapped awake. A ripple in magic. He instantly drew in his magic, slowed his breathing, and lay still, one eye barely open. Across the room, Hermes Mulciber's bed curtains lifted soundlessly. A black-robed figure slipped out, landing without a whisper. Hermes stood in the dark, checking something. He even paused beside each bed, including Regulus's. After a minute, he left the dormitory. Regulus waited 3 minutes before sitting up. He crossed to Hermes's bed. The curtains were still parted slightly. He didn't touch anything. He scanned with magic alone. The bed was neatly made. A book lay under the pillow, bound in dark red leather with no title. Protective charms layered it. Forcing a look would trigger an alarm. On the bedside table sat an empty glass vial. A trace of black liquid clung to the bottom. Regulus couldn't identify it, but it wasn't a standard potion. Hermes's skull bag rested near the window, zipper not fully closed. A corner of parchment showed. No protective magic. Regulus slid a thin probe of magic inside. A hand-drawn map. Crude lines, but clear labels. Hogwarts' main structure sat at the center. Several areas were circled. A corridor on the right side of the fourth floor, marked, searched, nothing found. An abandoned classroom area on the west side of the dungeons, wards present, need to break. And a room beneath the astronomy tower, labeled, possible entrance, unverified. Beneath the astronomy tower? There shouldn't be a room there. Just the outer wall. Unless it was hidden. Or a passage. Regulus withdrew his magic and returned to his bed. What was Hermes Mulciber searching for? Or who was he searching for it for? An hour later, at 1:14 a.m., the door opened again. Hermes slipped back inside. His steps were heavier this time. Fresh scorch marks marred the hem of his robe. A thin red cut crossed the back of his left hand, like a slice from something sharp. He paused in the doorway, eyes moving over the three beds. Satisfied, he went to his own. As he removed his outer robe, a faint sulfur smell reached Regulus. Magical flame. Or residue from some alchemical reaction. Hermes closed the curtains. Soft rustling followed. Then silence. Regulus stared up at the dark canopy above him. First year. 11 years old. Already involved in dangerous secrets. The Mulciber family is a pure-blood family. For generations, they dealt in rare magical artifacts. In reality, that meant brokering dark objects, smuggling, and private collections. They specialized in operating along the edges of the law, with quiet ties to shops in Nocturne Alley. No interest in politics. Only in forbidden knowledge and dangerous items. They didn't openly support Voldemort, but they supplied the Death Eaters under the table. Was Hermes acting on personal curiosity? Or carrying out a family task? If it was the latter, then whatever he was searching for was likely tied to the coming war. An owl hooted somewhere outside, distant and indistinct. Regulus let the thought settle. He would keep watching. He closed his eyes and began another cycle of magic circulation. In his mind, Orion's geometric form lit up once more, star-like magic flowing along carefully calculated paths. Chapter 26, Foundations. Thursday night's astronomy class was held at the highest point of the castle, the astronomy tower. By late September, the night sky over the Scottish Highlands was clear and sharp, the air cold enough to feel almost transparent. Tonight, we'll be learning how to identify the guiding star of the night sky, Sirius, Professor Aurora Sinistra said, her voice as soft as the night wind. She was an older witch, her silver hair neatly pinned into a bun. Tiny constellations were embroidered along the hem of her robes, and when she moved, it was as if starlight drifted with her. Sirius is not only the brightest star visible at night. In magical theory, it's also seen as a symbol of guidance and loyalty. Many ancient navigation charms and long-distance communication spells rely on observations of it for alignment. The students worked in pairs, adjusting telescopes mounted on brass stands. Regulus was paired with Alex Rosier. Cuthbert loudly declared that he had zero interest in staring at dots of light all night, and quickly slunk off with a few other Slytherin boys to yawn in a corner. Start by leveling the base, Regulus said quietly, watching Alex fumble with the adjustments. Right. Center the bubble, then loosen the vertical lock. Aim southeast, elevation about 20 degrees. Alex followed his instructions and peered through the eyepiece. It's all blurry. You haven't adjusted the focus yet. Regulus reached out and gently turned the knob on the tube. Slowly. Look for a very bright star with a bluish-white tint. After a moment, Alex let out a soft gasp. I see it. It's so bright. Like a blue-white gem. It's beautiful. That's serious. Regulus moved to the neighboring telescope. He calibrated and focused it with practiced ease, the star snapping into clarity. Through a magically enhanced astronomical telescope, Sirius was surrounded by an impossibly thin halo of light, pulsing faintly, almost like a slow breath. It was something no Muggle telescope could ever reveal. There was no proof, but the magical world believed it to be the star's magical radiance. Well done, Mr. Rosier. Professor Sinistra drifted over. Now record its position using the coordinate grid on your star chart. Pay attention to the ecliptic reference line. Once she moved on, Alex lowered his voice. How are you so good at this? You look like you've done it 100 times. We have a similar telescope at home, Regulus said. The Black family did, in fact, own an antique astronomical telescope, even if he'd never used it before. So what's astronomy actually good for? Alex muttered as he clumsily wrote down the coordinates. Besides stars being pretty. It's useful in more ways than you think. Regulus kept his eye on Sirius, recalling passages from the family library. Many advanced potions depend on precise lunar phases and stellar positions. A lot of the key ingredients for Felix Felicis, for example, have to be harvested under specific moon phases and star alignments. Some variants of ancient runes change in strength depending on the position of certain constellations. He went on, and that's not even counting old magical contracts, family rituals, or castle ward systems. Their power rises and falls with stellar cycles. Understanding the sky is, in a way, learning to read the hidden clock of the magical world. Alex stared at him. None of that's in the textbook. Because it's material for later years, Regulus said evenly. Or part of certain family traditions. At that moment, Professor Sinistra clapped her hands to draw everyone's attention. Now shift your telescope about 15 degrees to the left, and lower the elevation by 5 degrees. You should see 3 bright stars, nearly evenly spaced in a straight line. That's Orion's belt. Record their positions and relative angles. Regulus adjusted his telescope. When the 3 stars came into view, his hands stilled. It wasn't just their beauty. It was the pattern. 3 stars. Alitak, Al-Nilam, Mintaka. In Muggle astronomy, they were simply 3 unrelated stars hundreds of light years away, appearing aligned only by chance. But through a magical telescope, Regulus saw something else. Despite the vast distances between them, their magical radiance was not entirely separate. Extremely fine threads of magic, thin as spider silk, flowed slowly between the 3 points, forming a fragile triangular structure. He quickly recorded their coordinates on the star chart, connecting the points with dotted lines and marking the angles. Orion's belt was almost a perfect straight line, but not quite. There was a curvature so slight it was negligible on a cosmic scale, yet potentially critical in magical application. Regulus could build precise geometric models of constellations in his mind. He could simulate stellar positions, even calculate trajectories. Just now, without meaning to, he had projected their relative positions 100 years into the future based on their current data and known proper motion. Stars moved. Slowly, but undeniably. Each of Orion's belt stars traveled through the galaxy along its own vector. Was that motion itself part of their magical nature? He made a decision on the spot. He would incorporate the true movement of constellations into his meditation, using exact calculations and spatial visualization. Professor Sinistra's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. I see many of you have finished recording. Remember, the value of astronomy isn't memorizing constellation names. It's understanding the eternal rhythms within the movement of the stars. Class dismissed. Eternal rhythms. The words echoed in Regulus's mind as he packed away his star chart. Deep into the night, the dormitory was silent. Regulus sat cross-legged inside his four-poster bed, the curtains drawn, a soundproofing charm quietly in place. He closed his eyes and sank inward. Magic circulation and meditation began together. Inside his body, magic flowed like a gentle stream along familiar paths, nourishing every inch of flesh. This was physical tempering, the most basic foundation of all. At the same time, at the highest level of his awareness, he constructed a model of Orion's belt. Using remembered astronomical data, the subtle deviations he'd observed, calculated trajectories, and the star's own motion, he gave the 3 points an almost imperceptible but directional movement. A static framework, paired with a dynamic trend. Then he tried to align the rhythm of his internal magic circulation with the movement of those 3 points in his mind. At first, it didn't work. The flow of magic in his body was concrete and tangible, something he could feel. The motion of the stars was abstract, nearly motionless, as if it existed in another dimension entirely. But Regulus was patient. He focused all his attention on that dynamic model, sensing the tension of motion that was almost non-existent, yet undeniably real. Gradually, he made minute adjustments to the speed of his magic circulation, subtly altering its overall cadence. Slower, more solemn, and more constant. Time passed in silence. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Then, all at once, something clicked. Not that his magic traced constellation shapes through his body. It was deeper than that. The state of his internal circulation aligned with the essence of motion in the stellar model, reaching a level of harmony within his consciousness. In that instant, two completely different improvements occurred at once. The once gentle, nourishing flow of magic gained a heavier, denser quality. Where it passed, it didn't just restore. It reinforced. Muscles and bones seemed to be compacted and strengthened more efficiently under that synchronized resonance. A new sense of power rose slowly from deep within his limbs. At the same time, maintaining the dynamic model demanded extreme mental focus. Yet the moment it truly synchronized with stellar motion, his mind felt anchored, clearer and more stable. The everyday mental noise, the castle's constant magical whispers, even the faint sense of alienation and loneliness he carried as a reincarnator, were smoothed away by something vast and tranquil. His soul felt as if it had found a solid base, steady and unshakable. This was a qualitative leap. Regulus remained in that state, carefully observing every subtle change. Under synchronization, not only did his magic recover faster, the magic itself felt more condensed and obedient. He realized he might have brushed against a deeper magical truth. Body, mind, and magic had never been three separate elements. They could be unified, reinforcing one another, rising together. He named this integrated method in his mind, star-guided meditation. From now on, physical tempering and mental cultivation no longer needed to be separate practices. They became a single, complete discipline, one that sought harmony within the self. Thus, the foundation was laid. Chapter 27, The Slytherin Welcome. On the last day of September, just as dinner ended, the two seventh-year Slytherin prefects, Lucretius Burke and Narcissa Black, rose at the end of the long table and lightly tapped a silver spoon against a goblet. All Slytherin students are to return to the common room immediately after dinner, Narcissa said, standing with effortless grace. First years, attendance is mandatory. The moment her words settled, the mood at the Slytherin table shifted. Upperclassmen exchanged knowing looks. A few fifth-year boys even wore expressions that promised entertainment. Students from pure-blood families, especially those from the core lines of old houses, showed the same reaction. A quiet sense of anticipation. Finally. Cuthbert set down his cutlery at once, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, excitement flashing in his eyes. Hermes slowly lifted his head, his dark gaze sweeping over the prefects before settling on Regulus beside him. Only Alex, from a mild-mannered pure-blood branch family, blinked in confusion. He leaned closer and whispered, "What's going on? Why do we have to go back?" Cuthbert snorted, not bothering to hide the superiority in his tone, mixed with a trace of pity. "Rosier, didn't your family tell you?" "Well, I guess that figures. It's tradition. Slytherin's welcome. We see which of the new snakes has the sharpest fangs." Alex's face drained of color. Understanding dawned. He glanced at Regulus, then at the other first years, unease written all over him. The rest of the great hall caught on quickly. Whispers spread as older students explained Slytherin's customs to the younger ones. Regulus felt more than one glance from the staff table. The one that lingered was Dumbledore's. From the Gryffindor side came other looks as well. Regulus didn't respond to any of them. He simply stood and followed the flow. By the time they filed into the underground common room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Green flames leapt in the fireplace, reflecting off dark green drapes and silver decor, and off dozens of faces wearing very different expressions. Upperclassmen clustered around sofas and armchairs, talking in low voices, their eyes roaming over the 10 first years who had just arrived. The first years instinctively drew closer together, then subtly split into small groups. Cuthbert, Hermes, and the rest of the pure blood corps stood together, expressions ranging from arrogant to brooding. The others, including 2 half-blood students, a boy and a girl, looked isolated and out of place. Their eyes darted around the room, unsettled, before landing on Regulus almost in unison. Over the past month, Regulus had stood apart from other high-status pure-blood students. He never flaunted arrogance, never joined in petty talk about bloodlines. In class and group work, he was precise and fair. To those outside the pure-blood inner circle, or from ordinary backgrounds, the second son of the Black family was almost the only Slytherin first year who felt reasonable and dependable. Without realizing it, they edged a little closer to where Regulus stood. Regulus noticed the quiet reliance, but made no comment. He moved to the edge of the open space in the center of the room and stood there, calm, gray eyes sweeping over everyone. "Quiet." Lucretius Burke stepped in front of the fireplace, his voice low and serious. The common room fell silent at once. "The usual rules," he said succinctly. "First years will duel in pairs. Any spell is allowed, as long as you can cast it and it doesn't send Madame Pomfrey looking for us. The goal is to know yourself, and to know others. Slytherin respects power, and it respects the wisdom to control it." Before he finished, murmurs and snickers had already spread among the upperclassmen. Place your bets," a 6th-year boy laughed, pulling out a small notebook. "Who's the last rookie standing this year? Odds are open. I'm putting 10 galleons on the black kid." "That's hardly a gamble," the girl beside him scoffed. "Just look at him. Does he look 11 to you? I say he drops everyone in under 3 minutes." "Not necessarily," a bespectacled 7th year said, pushing his glasses up and pretending to analyze things. "That Mulciber boy looks dangerous. I've heard his family keeps some unusual collections. And the Avery kid isn't completely useless either. Oh, come on." The first boy nodded toward Regulus. "Look at how he's standing. Everyone else is either shaking, overexcited, or putting on a tough face like Avery. And him? He looks like he's waiting in his own study for someone to bring tea. I'll raise the bet. He won't even wrinkle his robes." The chatter drifted clearly into the ears of the first years. Cuthbert's face flushed, half with excitement, half with anger. Alex grew even more tense, fingers twisting the edge of his robe. The 2 half-blood students looked pale. Hermes remained dark and silent, his gaze on Regulus sharpening. And at the center of it all, Regulus himself stood without expression. "Now, draw lots for the first round," Narcissa said, producing a small silver cup filled with parchment slips. The results came quickly. Alex was paired with another nervous pure-blood boy from a side branch. A half-blood girl drew Cuthbert and went even paler. Regulus drew another pure-blood boy, who looked close to tears when he saw the name. "Wait." A low voice cut through the room. Hermes stepped forward, looking first at the prefects, then at Regulus. "I request to duel Regulus Black." The common room went still, then erupted into louder murmurs. Changing opponents wasn't common, but the rules didn't forbid it, as long as both parties agreed. Lucretius raised a brow and looked to Regulus. "Black." Every eye turned toward him. Regulus met Hermes's gaze. There was no provocation in those dark eyes. Only a kind of obsessive focus, something tightly restrained. He thought of the scorch scent in the dormitory. The dark red book with no title. "All right," Regulus said calmly. Then he added, "Since these are one-on-one matches in sequence, we can go last and let everyone else finish first." The boy who'd been replaced looked as if he'd been granted a reprieve from execution and hurried aside. The other first years didn't object. It was obvious to everyone that a match between Regulus and Hermes would be on a different level. The prefects exchanged a glance and nodded. "Very well. We'll begin with the other pairs." The duel started quickly. The open space was cleared, students crowding around to watch. Alex and his opponent floundered through their match, nerves making their incantations stumble and their disarming charms fly crooked. Alex ultimately lost after tripping over his own feet in a moment of panic, drawing a round of laughter. Cuthbert's match against the half-blood girl was far easier. A clean obstacle spell knocked her off balance, followed by a precise disarming charm that ended it. Several upperclassmen nodded in approval. The remaining matches followed a similar pattern. As Regulus had already noted, first years, even those carefully trained by pure-blood families, were still raw at this age. Their magic was immature, control weak, practical experience nearly non-existent. The contents of standard book of spells already demanded real effort from them. Disarming charms, obstacle spells, leg lockers, binding charms, petrification, fire spells. Being able to cast these basics smoothly and land them accurately was considered good among peers. For Regulus, there was no difficulty at all. Any spell that required precise movement, clear pronunciation, and basic magical guidance was almost effortless for him. One look, a bit of practice, and it was his. His control and computational precision more than compensated for his age, letting even simple spells display a stability and force far beyond what most first years could manage. Of course, magic wasn't that simple. Spells driven by intense emotion, complex conceptual understanding, or rare talents and catalysts were still areas he needed to study. After several rounds, the first years were exhausted. Some were exhilarated, some discouraged. In the end, only two remained standing in the center of the room. Regulus Black and Hermes Mulciber. Chapter 28, First Year Chief. They stood 10 feet apart and gave slight bows. "Begin," Narcissa announced. Hermes moved the instant the word left her mouth, his wand snapping forward. Rictus Empra. A streak of silver shot toward Regulus. Opening with the tickling charm wasn't lethal, but it was abrupt. Regulus didn't move his feet. He flicked his wand once, casually. Another silver flash met Hermes' spell midair with pinpoint accuracy, bursting into a scatter of glittering sparks. Locomotor Mortis. Hermes followed up at once, blue light skimming low across the floor. Regulus tapped his wand to the ground. An unseen barrier rose before him, and the leg locker hit it like a spell striking a slanted plane, sliding off and dissipating against the wall. Impedimenta. Hermes fired a third curse, quick and subtle. Impedimenta. Regulus answered with the same incantation. The two spells collided in the center of the space with a dull, pounding thud. Regulus's jinx was stronger. It crushed Hermes's spell outright and kept going. Hermes had to roll across the floor to avoid it, scrambling up in clear disarray. Nearby first years widened their eyes, hands flying to their mouths. Upperclassmen nodded, impressed. Anyone could see it. Regulus's spell power was absurd. Still, he didn't press the attack. He calmly blocked or redirected every spell Hermes threw at him. Binding charms were flicked aside. Some curses missed him by inches as he shifted just enough to let them pass. Throughout it all, Regulus never left the small patch of floor where he'd started. Every spell he used came straight from standard book of spells, basic defensive and interference magic, each cast with effortless precision. His expression never changed. It didn't look like a duel so much as a demonstration. Hermes, on the other hand, sped up. His casting grew sharper, trickier, far beyond what most first years could manage. His family had clearly taught him in advance. Yet his face darkened by the second, breath turning ragged. He wasn't stupid. He could see it. Regulus wasn't even trying. That calm, measured response was humiliating. "Is that all you can do, Black?" Hermes snarled, anger flashing in his eyes. "Just dodge." He broke off the rapid exchanges and raised his wand high. His chant dropped lower, harsher, the syllables twisted and difficult. An ominous dark red glow gathered at the tip, the air around it turning cold. Several upperclassmen frowned. Lucretius Burke stepped forward, ready to intervene. Narcissa's brow tightened, fingers already closing around her wand. Too late. Hermes hissed the final syllables. A beam of dark red, nearly black, heavy with pain and malice, tore across the room toward Regulus. Dark magic. It was clearly incomplete, its power greatly weakened, but the nature of it was unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the common room. For the first time, Regulus's calm gaze shifted. So this was it? Hermes was skilled in dark magic. Regulus could feel it clearly. This wasn't the first time Hermes had used that spell on a living person. Family tradition. Regulus abandoned the basic spells. He pointed his wand forward. No gesture. No incantation. The motion was stripped to its bare minimum. A solid silver barrier snapped into place in front of him, crystalline as cut glass, its surface alive with intricate, orderly ripples that flowed without breaking. The dark red beam slammed into it. A teeth-aching hiss tore through the air. Like metal being eaten alive. Red light raked across the silver shield, clawing and gnawing at its surface, unable to punch through. The standoff lasted barely 2 seconds. Hermes's face went pale, disbelief flooding his eyes as the beam sputtered and vanished. The silver barrier remained, flawless. In the same instant the dark light died, Regulus stepped forward. A pinpoint of red flared at his wand tip. Expelliarmus. The spell was denser and faster than anything Hermes had cast, a bolt of red tearing through the air and striking him square in the chest. Crack. Hermes's wand flew upward, spinning in an arc, caught cleanly by Regulus's free hand. The duel was over. It was mercy, in its own way. Otherwise, a single leg locker would have been enough to drop Hermes to his knees. From the moment Hermes cast dark magic to the instant Regulus broke it and disarmed him, less than 5 seconds passed. Many students hadn't even finished reacting to the appearance of dark magic. The common room fell into dead silence. Hermes stood frozen, his right hand still clenched as if holding his wand. His body trembled. His face was bloodless, his eyes empty, unable to accept that his most secret, most trusted weapon had been dismantled so easily. Regulus stepped forward and returned the wand. His voice stayed even, without triumph or disdain. Just calm. Good attempt. but the spell structure is unstable, and your magic supply falters. Next time you use it, you should be thinking about killing me, not hesitating." The air seemed to freeze. The word killing, spoken so evenly by an 11-year-old, sent a chill through the room. Upperclassmen reacted first. Lucretius's eyebrows shot up, open appreciation and even delight flashing in his eyes. Nearby, several 5th and 6th year pureblood students traded looks, murmuring under their breath. "Did you hear that? Thinking about killing me. Merlin. From a first year. Elegant. Powerful. And a 7th-year girl from the Caro family licked her lips, eyes bright. No moral panic over dark magic. He knows exactly what it is. That's how a Slytherin should be. The Black family might really produce someone dangerous this time," a boy from the Knot family said, his tone cautious. To them, Regulus had judged dark magic as a technique, critiqued its execution, and ignored its inherent evil. That mindset aligned far more closely with certain ancient pureblood values than Hermes's half-formed curse ever could. Alex parted his lips, his gaze flicking from Hermes, pale and hollow-eyed, to Regulus, calm as ever. He wanted to say something. It was just a match. This had gone too far. Words like killing did not belong here. Neither did spells that felt this dark. Nothing came out. The words never came. When Regulus's calm gaze swept past him, every naive thought froze in place. Alex dropped his head, staring at the tips of his shoes. Cuthbert felt something else entirely. After the conflict in flying class, he'd thought the gap between himself and Regulus might be bridged with technique and cleverness. Now he understood. The difference was visible, undeniable. He clenched his fists, then slowly let them go, watching in silence. As for Hermes himself, the emptiness in his eyes snapped into focus. He stared at Regulus, humiliation, shock, fear, and a trace of panic churning together. He had hesitated. He hadn't dared, couldn't dare, to cast that spell at full strength in front of everyone. He yanked his wand back, dropped his head, and slipped into the shadows at the edge of the crowd, locking every emotion behind his familiar brooding mask. Ahem. Narcissa cleared her throat, breaking the tension. She and Lucretius exchanged a look. Tonight's welcome had achieved its purpose. There was no need to continue. No suspense left to wring from it. Lucretius stepped forward, scanning the remaining first years. "Does anyone wish to challenge Black, or Mulciber?" His gaze moved slowly across them. Alex kept his head down. The others shook their heads, avoiding his eyes. Even Cuthbert, who might once have harbored a thought or two, stood in silence. "In that case," Lucretius said evenly, "the position of first-year chief goes to Regulus Black. Let this be the standard you aim for." Chapter 29, A Letter from Bella. The noise from the Slytherin welcome hadn't fully died down yet. Students were breaking into small groups, voices low as they rehashed the brief but explosive duel. Regulus had just stepped away from the cleared space in the center of the common room, intending to head back to the dormitory, when someone called his name. "Regulus." It was Narcissa Black. She stood near the archway leading to the girls' dormitories, alone for once, without the usual cluster of older girls around her. She was clearly waiting for him. A few upper-year boys who had been about to approach the newly crowned chief took the hint and stopped short. "Cousin Narcissa." Regulus turned and walked over. He wasn't surprised she wanted to speak with him, only that she'd chosen to do it so soon. Narcissa didn't answer. She simply gestured for him to follow. They left the common room and entered a narrow stone corridor. There were no portraits here, only cold walls and greenish torches burning at regular intervals. Once she was sure they were alone, Narcissa turned. Worry and severity were written plainly across her face. She drew a black sealed envelope from her sleeve. The wax bore a snarling skull with a snake clamp between its teeth. A symbol not yet public, but already quietly recognized in certain circles. Bella sent this for you. Narcissa lowered her voice. She specifically told me to wait until you'd secured the chief position before giving it to you. Regulus took the letter. The black envelope felt faintly cool, with a trace of unsettling magical residue clinging to it. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at Narcissa. She seemed to understand the unspoken question and sighed softly. The situation outside is tightening, Regulus. That man, his influence is spreading fast. It's no longer secret meetings and small-scale trouble. The Ministry of Magic. The Wizengamot. Even the Hogwarts Board. There are people backing him, or people afraid of him. Some shops in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade have quietly changed hands. A few editors from dissenting papers have stepped down for health reasons. And 2 officials from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who publicly questioned the abuse of the Statute of Secrecy were found last month, injured by so-called experimental magic gone wrong, and sent to St. Mungo's. She looked straight at Regulus. He's persuasive and dangerous. Promises, threats, and power, openly displayed. He's weaving a net. Among the pure-blood families, the Lestranges are already at the core. The Knotts, the Carrows, the Yaxleys have chosen sides. Many others are waiting, weighing their options. The Malfoys. She drew a steadying breath. The Malfoys as well. Regulus understood. Narcissa herself might not fully agree with Voldemort's vision of conquest and cleansing, but she was about to marry into the Malfoy family. Her position would be bound to Lucius Malfoy's choice, and to the family's interests. She had no room to maneuver. It matched what Regulus remembered of history, only sharper, more detailed. The shape of Voldemort's first rise was becoming disturbingly clear. "Thank you for telling me," Regulus said calmly, slipping the letter into an inner pocket of his robes. Narcissa studied his face, as if searching for even a flicker of fear or uncertainty. She found none. In the end, she only said quietly, "Be careful of Bella. She isn't the same anymore. And be careful of what's written in that letter. You're young, but that won't protect you forever." With that, she gave a slight nod and turned away, her robes whispering against the stone as she left the corridor. Back in the dormitory, Cuthbert, Hermes, and Alex hadn't returned yet. Regulus drew his bed curtains and cast a soundproofing charm before taking out the letter. He broke the seal. A faint scent drifted out, expensive perfume layered over something sharper, burned, almost acrid. The parchment was thick. The handwriting was wild and forceful, the strokes pressing so hard they nearly tore through the page, betraying the writer's agitation. "My dearest cousin Regulus. I was delighted to hear that you've already distinguished yourself at Hogwarts, claiming the position of Slytherin chief. It fills me with pride. The noble blood of the Black family runs strong in you. You have not disappointed me, the family, or our Lord. This is a magnificent era, Regulus. The old order is crumbling. The rotten Ministry of Magic is controlled by cowards and mudblood sympathizers who defile our birthright and our glory. But dawn is coming. A true king has risen. He will lead us to cleanse this tainted world and rebuild an eternal order belonging to pure-blood wizards alone. That is what we deserve. You have shown talent, but it is far from enough. You must grow faster, become stronger and more resolute. Slytherin's little games are only the beginning. The real battlefield lies beyond the castle walls. Our Lord requires loyal and capable followers. The Black family must claim the most brilliant place in this new era. Do not be misled by weak sentiment. Do not shackle yourself with false morality. Power is truth, and truth belongs only to the victor. I have already reported your situation to our Lord. He is very interested in you. A Black who displays such ability at so young an age has caught his attention. Remember this interest, Regulus. It is a supreme honor, and it should drive you forward. Do not fail it. Be ready at all times, cousin. When the summons comes, prove yourself worthy of the black name, worthy of serving a greater cause. Your loyal and eager cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange. The letter ended. Regulus rested the parchment on his knees, his face unreadable. The fervor, obsession, and hunger for violent power spilling from Bella's words were even stronger than he'd expected. This wasn't simple loyalty. It was devotion twisted into something pathological. The pressure was obvious too. Bella, or rather Voldemort behind her, had no intention of overlooking him just because he was 11. Especially that line about Voldemort taking an interest in him. That wasn't a good sign. Attention like that usually meant scrutiny, trials, and punishment if expectations weren't met. He'd thought he had at least a few years to build strength and find his own path. Now it seemed time was tighter than he'd imagined. Voldemort's net was closing, and the Black family was already caught inside it. A cold irritation crept into his normally steady thoughts. When Regulus stepped back into the common room, plenty of students were still around. He spotted Alger Traverse at once, the 5th year he'd humiliated at the start of term, surrounded by a few pure-blood followers. They had claimed the area near the fireplace, speaking just loudly enough, their eyes flicking now and then toward the dormitory corridor. When Regulus appeared, Traverse raised his voice deliberately. So really, no matter how talented you are, you're still a baby who needs watching. First year chief, what does that even mean? A real Slytherin thinks long-term. Real influence. Not a bit of cleverness and luck, getting praised twice and suddenly believing you matter. His cronies chuckled along. Several upperclassmen who hadn't left yet, including some neutrals, turned to watch, interest lighting their faces. They knew about the earlier conflict between Traverse and Regulus. They also knew exactly what Traverse was doing, trying to knock the shine off the new chief at the height of his momentum. It was a familiar scene in Slytherin. Cuthbert and Alex were sitting in the sofa area nearby. Cuthbert frowned, eyes moving from Traverse to Regulus. Alex looked openly uneasy. Even Hermes, who had been lurking in a corner, shifted and drifted closer, stopping about 5 meters away, watching in silence. Traverse, a 6th-year girl said, the same one who had praised Regulus earlier. That's enough. He's only a first year. First year. Alger Traverse scoffed and finally turned fully toward Regulus, malice and confidence plain on his face. A first year who uses who knows what underhanded tricks on older students. A first year who makes certain people lose their heads and circle him like moths. I'm just stating facts. If you're young, learn restraint. Learn to respect your seniors. Don't let a bit of talent go to your head. Do you really think being Slytherin chief is some grand achievement? Chapter 30, An Overwhelming Victory. Traverse's words grew sharper by the second. He twisted the facts on purpose, reducing Regulus's strength to cheap tricks and luck. Regulus lowered his head slightly, calm and composed. He knew exactly what Traverse was doing. He was trying to provoke him, push him into losing control and striking first. If Regulus attacked first, Traverse, a 5th year forced to defend himself, would hold the moral high ground no matter how the duel ended. And Traverse was confident. As long as he stayed focused and didn't make careless mistakes, he would never embarrass himself the way he had last time. The surrounding chatter gradually faded. Everyone was watching Regulus, waiting for his response. Regulus stood where he was, listening to those malicious words, feeling the cold irritation carried by the letter in his chest slowly ferment and heat up. He looked at Alger Traverse's face, full of calculation and spite, and suddenly found it ridiculous and tiresome. Why were there always people who couldn't see reality for what it was? The corner of his mouth slowly lifted, forming a smile so cold it was nearly sharp. Those who knew him well froze when they saw it. Cuthbert and Alex exchanged uneasy glances. Both of them sensed it at once. Something about Regulus's mood was off. Even Hermes, lurking in the shadows, had his gaze stall for a brief moment. In the corner, Snape watched closely, eyes narrowed as he studied the Regulus who looked like an entirely different person. Regulus did not explode in anger or snap back the way Travers expected. He did not even spare a glance for the upper years waiting eagerly for a show. He simply took 2 steps forward and spoke in a flat, icy voice. "Save your clumsy provocation, Travers. You want me to attack first so you can claim forced self-defense and claw back that pitiful excuse for pride. Such a childish trick, and you're still acting it out with such enthusiasm." As he watched Travers's expression sour instantly, Regulus continued in that unsettlingly calm tone. "Like a clown." 3 light words, yet they landed like 3 hard slaps across Alger Travers's face. Then Regulus raised the wand in his hand. "So stop wasting time. Draw your wand." The common room fell into dead silence, broken only by the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Travers's face flushed and drained in turns. The humiliation of having his scheme exposed in public tangled with the fury of being called a clown. He had never imagined Regulus would ignore the usual rules entirely and rip his calculations open in the most brutal way possible. "Fine." Travers yanked out his wand, pointing it straight at Regulus, forcing a vicious look onto his face. "If you're this arrogant, I'll teach you where the gap between a first year and a 5th year really lies. I'll also teach you how to respect your senior." The crowd automatically spread outward, clearing the space once more. Whispered voices surged like a tide. "Tisk, Travers really is an idiot. He still thinks everyone else is one too. The black kid's ruthless. He tore the mask right off. 5th year versus 1st year. Even if Black beat Travers last time, wasn't that basically a sneak attack? Maybe not. Did you see how he blocked that dark spell? That's different. Mulciber was a 1st year too. Travers has had 5 proper years of training. This should be good." Cuthbert clenched his fists tightly. Alex had already squeezed his eyes shut. Hermes leaned against a stone pillar not far away, his dark gaze locked on the center of the room. Lucretius made no move to intervene. In Slytherin, a private, mutual duel like this was often tolerated as long as it didn't spiral into something irreversible. "Start," a thrill-seeking upper year shouted. Alger Travers rushed the attack, lessons from last time firmly in mind, wand already in hand. Stupefy. A blazing red bolt shot straight at Regulus's face. Regulus flicked his wand lightly. Light flashed, and the stunning spell was intercepted right in front of him. Incendio. Travers switched spells, a blazing serpent of fire roaring from his wand. Regulus did not move. His wand tipped upward with a casual motion, followed by a fire-extinguishing charm. The flames vanished into nothing, taking even the lingering heat with them. Regulus's cool voice carried over. "Is that all?" He did not give Travers another chance to cast. Regulus snapped his wand, and the leg locker curse struck with pinpoint accuracy. Travers's body went slack. As he pitched forward, an impedimenta slammed into his torso. Bang! The 2 spells hit in rapid succession. Travers was flipped stiffly in midair, and before he could hit the ground, another impedimenta followed immediately. Bang! He flew like a torn sack of cloth, battered helplessly through the air. The brief combo made several upper years wince. Just watching it looked painful. Hiss. A 6th year girl sucked in a breath, hugging her shoulders. "That has to hurt." Another boy nodded. Compared to the pain, Travers probably feels worse inside. A 4th year exclaimed, "Look at Black's spells. Silent, fast, the transitions are perfect." Several others exchanged looks. "Could you dodge that?" "What about you?" "No chance." After taking 3 spells in a row, Traverse's mind was blank as he flew backward. He didn't even register what had happened before he hit the ground. But it hurts everywhere. He flew 7 or 8 meters. Instead of the expected impact, he sank straight into a mire of sludge. Reducto. In a panic, Traverse fired the curse at the ground beneath him, trying to blast his way free. Before the spell could finish its work, an empty armchair beside him suddenly came alive. Its wooden frame twisted, stretched, and reshaped itself. In moments, it became a massive python nearly 10 meters long. The serpent slid forward without a sound, coiling around Traverse's waist and yanking him out of the sludge before tightening its grip. Ah! Traverse screamed in terror, his wand flailing. Dip indo. The spell struck the snake, blasting away a few scales. Beneath them, flesh was clearly visible. That was all it did. The coils tightened instead, squeezing the air from his lungs. Let go. Let go of me. Traverse struggled uselessly, his face turning red. Regulus walked closer at an unhurried pace. He looked down at the wretched figure bound tightly by the python, his expression utterly unmoved. With an almost leisurely flick of his wand, he gave another command. The python began to move, dragging Traverse, who struggled in vain, in slow circles across the open space of the common room. One circle. Then another. Like a grotesque display of a captured trophy. That's enough. Let him go. A 6th-year boy friendly with Traverse couldn't stand it any longer and shouted. Regulus glanced at him. That single look choked off the rest of the sentence in the boy's throat. Only when Traverse began rolling his eyes from lack of air and humiliation did Regulus seem to lose interest. Then he lifted his wand. The python released him instantly, collapsing back into a broken, fabric-shredded armchair. Alger Traverse crumpled to the floor like a fish hauled out of water, coughing and gasping violently. His robes were smeared with saliva, his face streaked with tears and snot, his wand nowhere to be seen. The common room was silent. Everyone stared at the black-haired boy who still looked neat and untouched, as if he had merely taken a casual walk. Using only basic spells and a single, precise, imaginative act of transfiguration, he had toyed with a 5th year from start to finish. The entire exchange had ended without his opponent ever brushing the edge of his robes. Some even wondered whether, if this hadn't been a crowded common room, Black would have killed Traverse outright. The way the python moved had made it painfully clear. Traverse had been seconds from suffocation. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was a display of skill and intent, edged with something cruel. Regulus did not spare the defeated boy another glance. He ignored the stunned, awed, and faintly fearful looks around him. The irritation in his chest seemed to ease slightly after this one-sided game, yet a deeper, colder urgency still settled heavily in his heart. He put away his wand and turned, walking straight toward the corridor leading to the dormitories through the heavy silence. Cuthbert opened his mouth, then closed it without a word. Alex stood there, completely stunned. Hermes cast one last unreadable look at Regulus's back, then glanced at the collapsed Traverse before melting quietly back into the shadows. After tonight, the name Regulus Black would likely carry a very different meaning in Slytherin.